Welcome to all. We begin, as always, with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Public participation. What are we doing with public participation?
Muted.
Okay. Dr. Engineer?
One speaker. Yeah, but this is one speaker, and each should have him, but just say the name and the table.
Right. Dr. Stephen Hedges, I apologize for the pronunciation if that is incorrect.
Dr. Hegedus, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the board. Good morning. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to provide some comments to the State Board of Education during the public comment period. My name is Stephen Hegedus, and I'm the current president of the Connecticut chapter of the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, which is AACTE, Connecticut. I'm also the Dean of the College of Education at Southern Connecticut State University. For the record, AACTE Connecticut is an association of 14 public and private colleges and universities that provide educator preparation programs to students interested in the education profession. We promote and strongly support high-quality teaching and education in the state schools and our advocates for robust educational leadership. We want to thank the board and the Department of Education for working with our association on issues of mutual interest over the years and look forward to continuing our relationship and partnerships. We have all been impacted by the COVID-19 health crisis and have had to adjust and adapt to a wide variety of new challenges, including remote instruction for our students. We thank our superintendents and school leaders deeply for continuing to work with us in offering clinical fieldwork experiences for our students within the schools and also online. As the association representing educator preparation programs of higher education institutions here in Connecticut, we are proud of the high quality education that we offer to our students so they can become the future teachers and educational leaders in our schools. We are committed to excellent evidence-based teacher preparation methods to ensure that our future teachers are ready and prepared when they enter our classrooms. We are ready to be flexible and innovative in meeting the needs of our school districts while maintaining quality programming by our excellent faculty and staff. The AACTE Connecticut chapter stands ready to continue to promote educated, well-trained, and highly qualified teachers for school districts throughout Connecticut. We desire to continue to work together when possible with the various educational stakeholders, such as the State Board of Education, the Department of Education, the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, CAPS, the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, and other education organizations. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. We don't have any executive session, do we? And have a motion on the minutes of the September 2 meeting.
Move to approve. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Was there somebody saying something?
Yeah.
Was there an abstention?
No, I think they were saying aye.
Oh, okay. Ready to go. Aye.
There's a delay.
Commissioner.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all in person for those of you that are in person, but virtually for those who are online joining us. Thank you for your time today. Ajit will be progressing the slides, so I'll wait for the slides to come up. There they are. And Ajit, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe not.
A little delay. Good. So I'll go through the slides of some of the highlights of this past month for our agency, and I'll start by, next slide, please. Just an overview of the last month. There were several events. You know, it's really nice to get back into the routine of back-to-school events. We continue with our meetings with our education partners. We've continued with our webinars. There were several visits to districts to see students learning, which is really the highlight of the month. We had the Cape back-to-school meeting with Chairman Taylor and Vice Chair Lopez, and several interviews in English and Spanish media outlets. I have to admit that I've been brushing up on my Spanish. Yesterday I was on 11:20 a.m. and I'm learning how to say some of these technical words in Spanish now, such as mitigation strategies. But, you know, the good news is that we're out there, we're having conversations, and we're doing so discussing not only reopening during a pandemic, but equally as important, the work that we're doing as an agency to continue to move the needle forward for our students in Connecticut. Some events with manufacturing that was spearheaded by our academics office, and you'll hear more about some of the talent work going on. So I'll let that go on later on in the meeting. Next slide, please. Couple quick highlights. In terms of some of the work that's being done, you know, leading through the pandemic, there's a lot of partnerships going on to help build capacity around the state with regard to working through some of the challenges of the pandemic, but also things like navigating FAFSA, which is a challenge in many cases as well. Educator evaluation and support flexibility to make sure that we're adjusting what we need to adjust to be supportive of districts and of students ultimately by including SEL where it's needed a little bit more and relaxing some of the flexibilities as you've heard. The special education back to school conference was really important where Brian and his team were available to support districts as they move forward and educating our students with special needs. Next slide, please. And I think that the key message here is we're continuing to thrive despite challenges. Kids are back, and that's a significant step forward. Our kids are back in front of their teachers, the majority of the kids in Connecticut, and we're pleased about that. So our academic office, as you can see, has been really busy with a lot of the work to make sure that we're continuing with the arts, continuing with what reimagined classrooms could look like. You'll know that the learning model and enrollment weekly data collection systems have been developed, thanks in large part to Ajit and his team, the performance office, to track data in ways that we've never done it before. So quick systems were set up, and ultimately some of these systems are going to move to DPH for the reporting feature. But it's really important to share with this board that because we needed new data, we had to set up new systems for this, and that's a lot of work when we're talking about 200 districts inputting data. Attendance is information that we're going to be getting earlier than we typically get it, and more information will come on that. But a lot of hard work at the agency. Next slide, please. You know about the partnership that we have with DPH that continues to strengthen during a health pandemic. It's really important that we maintain ongoing and regular communication. And two things that you might be aware of already, but are worth sharing, are stronger than ever. One of them is the subcommittee of members of DPH, members of CSDE, and some folks from the Yale School of Public Health that are looking at the rules of education, and they're vetted through that group. That group meets Monday afternoons, and we have representatives from districts also to make sure that we're looking at all different perspectives. And then the second one, Health and Safety Tuesdays, are 8 to 9 o'clock calls, 8 to 9 a.m. calls where we have health experts on the call, epidemiologists, available to answer any questions from folks in districts, local health directors as well, so that we're all calibrated on the best approach to move forward and there's clarification. So they're very well attended. Hundreds of people attend these calls, and it's an example of some of the support that we provide. Charlene does a great job organizing both of these, and I heard recently that Massachusetts is looking down saying, hey, what are you doing over there? We want to see if we could model some of that stuff. So great stuff happening there. Move next slide, please. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Hispanic Heritage Month. You know, I think and here's a playlist of some of the things, some of the resources that our team has shared with district. You know, for me, I can sum this up by saying when students are seen, they perform better, right? When you're seen, you do better. So we honor the contributions of Hispanic Americans here in Connecticut and the country, and we honor Hispanic Heritage Month, and it's a great way to celebrate some of the finer parts of that culture, and I've been happy to be able to be a part of that, and I appreciate the work that our team has done to spread the message and get some great resources out into the district. Moving along, another wonderful thing to celebrate are our National Blue Ribbon Schools. Congratulations to the Blue Ribbon Schools. George Hersey Robertson Schools in Coventry, Norton School in Cheshire, South Street School in Danbury, and Northeast School in Vernon. This is like the Oscars of awards for schools. So, and I know being in a district when there was talk about Blue Ribbon, everybody stood up straight. Everybody knew this is the big one, and I couldn't be more happy for these districts, these schools, and the people in those schools, and those students ultimately, because they're the beneficiaries of the success of those schools. So if you'll indulge me for a minute, next slide. I want to acknowledge and congratulate Dave Petrone and Jennifer Dragan and the entire staff of Hersey Robertson School in Coventry. You know, one of the things that stood out in theirs is that in 1819, students achieved 90.6% of their math growth targets. Like, that's huge. So these math targets are based off of the performance of these students in previous assessments. They're not just some random target. They're based on the students' progress over the years before. They hit 90% of those targets, which is not easy to do. That means that there's tremendous instruction going on, good intervention, and high standards. Congratulations to that school and Jennifer Dragan. The next school, I want to congratulate Superintendent Jess Solon and Principal Kelly Grillo for their work at Norton Elementary School in Cheshire. Wonderful progress there. There, I think the thing that stood out to me is really the gradual release of responsibility framework. Now, you might wonder, well, isn't this about achievement in math and literacy? Well, the reality is they're doing something right with regard to instruction and release of responsibility. They have students engaged in this work. So when teachers are able to gradually release the responsibility of learning to students, and they do that explicitly, and that's a strategy that they use, it's no shock that they get to become a Blue Ribbon School. I commend the educators there for their ability to engage students in the learning process. Congratulations, Norton Elementary School. Good job. And, you know, we've heard a lot in Danbury about a spike recently and how they're having to adjust, but you know what? This is the headline. One of their schools is a Blue Ribbon School. Congratulations to South Street School. Carmen Vargas Guevara, the principal there, and Sal Pasquarella, the superintendent. Congratulations. For me, what really stood out in this one, and I love the name of it, the Win Block. So the Win Block is really what I need. So they structured in their schedule time to really see what are the kids' needs. Do they need intervention? Do they need acceleration? Do they need to be pushed harder? And by structuring this into the school, it's more likely that all students are going to be challenged when they need to be challenged and get the support and intervention when they need it during that win block. Here's an example where the principal and the school staff structured it into their day in order to make sure that every kid gets the attention that they need. So congratulations to South Street School in Danbury. And last but not least, Northeast Elementary School in Vernon. Congratulations to Dr. Brenda Green, the principal, the entire staff there, and Superintendent Joe McCary. We happened to be in Vernon on their first day of school, and we're really impressed with the performance of those students and how they adjusted. What really stood out here, you know, there's so many different things to celebrate, but in this school, what stood out to me is that they accounted their success to relationships and culture. And I think that's extremely important to pull out, that your strategy could be fantastic, but if the culture is not there for success, and if the relationships are not there, where there's trust and mutual growth based on interaction between students and teachers and the administration, then you're not going to see the growth that you want to see. they identified that as a foundation for their success. So congratulations, Northeast Elementary School in Vernon, well deserved. You know, really pleased with that, and it's nice to hear about those successes. I also want to update you with some of the updates that I think is really important for you to hear, and some of the data collection systems that I mentioned earlier. This is what we're learning. COVID positive confirmed cases reported by the school district. And it's important to share with you that this is not necessarily spreading within the school. As a matter of fact, what we're hearing from DPH is that there's no record of it being spread throughout the school, but that these cases are being reported by the school. So what we found as of 9 a.m. today, right before the meeting, I updated this, a total in Connecticut of 544 cases since August 27th, when school opened. Okay, August 27th, 544 cases. 406 students have been reported to have had COVID-19, 138 staff. This last week, from October 1st to October 7th, the number is 159. That gives you a little bit more perspective of more recently. Okay, and I think it's important for this board to hear that all cases are counting. So if I'm a student that never stepped foot into school since August, because of my parents chose to elect fully remote, but in my interaction in the community, I've contracted COVID-19, that still counts as our school reported numbers, just so you're aware, because they're still students. So I want you to be aware that not all of these cases are people that have walked into schools, okay?
Can that be broken down?
Excuse me?
Can that be broken down?
Yes. The data collection system that we have now was done maybe 3-4 weeks ago, was developed. The one that we're transitioning to, the DPH, which is more robust, will have distinctions there. And I think it's important that we break it down so that we can have clarity around the data. And then, you know, one of the other things, so I mentioned the two different data systems earlier. The first one is the one that I just reported. The second is we wanted to track the learning model that districts are using. And this picture on the bottom right is really just a snapshot, so you can't click on it and see what happens. But we won't go to it now, but the link there, EdSite Supporting Student Participation page, if you click on that link, you'll see a live map, like a heat map of what schools are doing. The darker blue, the more students are remote. So you can see there, like for example, the Danbury is dark blue. There was an outbreak before, so they went to online learning, fully remote. The darker one on the right, I believe that's Norwich. Again, an example of where there's the model is fully remote as a result of some of the changes that have had to be made. So this is a good way for us to kind of keep tabs on how things are moving along at the state. These are the two new systems that were developed like overnight in data people terms. Usually it takes months to do something like this. I commend our team greatly. Next slide, please. A breakdown of that is, 34% of our districts are fully in person. About 60% are hybrid, and about 6% are fully remote. That hasn't changed in the last week. It's always important to recognize that we don't necessarily always want to compare ourselves to other states because the spread of infection is different in different states. But the 34% is the highest percentage of our states in this area here, and that all the credit goes to the district leaders and the school leaders and the teachers who are really all in on this plan to get students back in. We're going to continue to work with districts and have them work with their local health departments to determine what's the best approach moving forward for their district when you're trying to balance bringing students in and the importance of the mitigation strategies, which include distancing. The participation of our students, there are roughly 515,000 students. 31% are fully remote. And one of the areas that we're happy to report is that over 96% of our students who are fully remote are engaged, meaning they're connected, right? And that's up close to 1,400 students in 1 week. So the students are logging on, they have their materials, they're logging on, and schools are engaging with them. You recall that in the spring, there were upwards of 25 who weren't fully engaged, 25%. So we're pleased with that. Obviously continues. There's more work to be done, and we want to make sure that these students are not only engaged once or twice, but that they're engaged fully. But this is some promising news And at the end of the day, the last thing I want to share with you is,
Commissioner, before you
Yeah.
go from that screen, I don't understand the math. It says there are 162,000 fully remote students, 96.3% fully are engaged, whatever that means, but the N is only 6,000. So
of the fully remote students.
of the fully remote, which is 162,000.
Right.
So 90% of 162,000 is somewhere over 90,000, but
So I believe the number, okay, this is probably why, and Ajit, you could correct me if I'm wrong here. Originally, that said 3.7% of the fully remote students are not engaged. And I turned it 3.7 not engaged to 96.3 engaged. So that number is the number of students that are not engaged.
oh, okay.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. So that number should be 96.3% of the 162. So that N is 6,000 that are not engaged. And that number is lower by 1370. So 1370 have engaged over the last week that weren't previously engaged. Thank you for bringing that up.
So do we have an idea where those unengaged students are? Is there a particular location? Is it across the board?
We're looking at disaggregating that data. I don't have that information in front of me, but it could be that in the systems that we're developing now, we're breaking it down by district. Ajit, did you want to comment on that?
That'll be part of the monthly collection. So when that monthly collection comes in a couple of weeks, we'll be able to pinpoint exactly where those kids are and what this.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
And, you know, part of the data collection development is more drill down information. I think that's going to be coming next one. Probably by next month, we should be able to have that.
Great, I appreciate it.
And then lastly, as I said earlier, you know, we have roughly 515,000 students. Close to 70% of those students have walked into a schoolhouse for the first time in 6 months since last 3 or 4 weeks. And that's tremendous progress that I don't want to overlook or I don't want to minimize at all. That was because of the hard work of our districts, of our families who worked tremendously hard to adjust their schedules to make this possible, and obviously of our team here at State Farm. So that concludes the commissioner's report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that data. That's very helpful. I think we all wanted to have a better sense of the state of going back to schools in terms of face-to-face, hybrid, and remote.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're able to collect data that tells the story is really helpful, not only for understanding where we are, but also for interventions and also for later on understanding what worked best and so on.
Thank you. If I could, Chair, one important thing I left out is I had the pleasure of having an impromptu visit to Phoenix Manufacturing, and I had a wonderful tour along with our Chief Academic Officer, Irene Parisi, by Martha Prue, and I got to see the great work that they do over there, and it was part of a visit that morning on celebrating Manufacturing Month. We were able to visit there, and I was extremely impressed with not only the tour, but the work that they do there and how our schools need to continue to evolve to make sure that we're meeting the demand of places like Phoenix Manufacturing. I just want to personally thank you for the tour and for the enthusiasm you have around making sure that our school systems are meeting the demands of our businesses. So thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner, you mentioned the spread of the COVID is not, as far as we know. I know, can we ask them to mute? Can someone ask them to mute?
I think Wilda was asking a question.
Is there someone directing who's asking questions? I don't know. Is the Wilda, she was asking a question?
I couldn't.
No, good morning. No, I was not asking a question. No.
Thank you.
And it's been reported, and I know on these Tuesdays calls, it's been made very clear that a lot of what we're seeing in the schools, that the schools themselves are not necessarily part of the spread. My question is, and I'm just curious, and I'm assuming there's communication with Hartford being in the news for the last couple of days and making a major decision on Monday. I'm just curious if they have schools that I can understand if they have particular schools and they have connected it to the spread to close down, but is there conversations, I guess, going on with Hartford about why they would choose to go full remote if there is no, I hate to use the word proof because it's not proved, but why would they choose to go that avenue if it's not connected to the spread? I would almost think that sending all the children home could almost increase the spread versus the other way around. And I'm just curious about that with Hartford being so in the news now.
Right. So yes, we're aware that Hartford is in the planning stages of, making decisions. And I think part of it is at least alerting that if the numbers continue to rise, I believe there was some rise there, that they would want to tip off, for lack of a better word, the fact that they may have to transition. To be very frank, a lot of the conversation like that is happening with their local health directors and the superintendents, and some factors outside of what the public purview might be need to be considered. So if you look at Addendum 4, it says the leading indicator might be number of cases per 100,000 over a 7-day average. The secondary indicator might be the infection, the positivity rate, and then there might be other indicators like distancing or mitigation strategies. So there might be other factors that may not be as readily apparent that they're using. I'm also hearing, and Ledgelight comes to mind now. Ledgelight Health District is encouraging through their communication to districts, consider hybrid as a model. So we want to balance making sure we're giving students an opportunity to be in the buildings because we think that's where they learn best. And in many cases, you won't see students wearing masks if they're not in school. They might be out in the community, they may not be wearing masks. So to your point, but I think what's happening is they're having conversations with their local health districts. They're looking at factors not only in the schools, but in the community, and that might be driving their decisions. We'll continue to have communications with those districts, especially large districts like New Haven and Hartford, where there's so many students. We'll continue to have those conversations.
And then my other point is just a comment about the DPH and the department Tuesday morning call. We had discussed this a little bit before, but those are so important. And I know Charlene and her staff have done an immense amount of work, and there's so many district leaders on there. I think at all possible, I guess my thing to districts is to distribute that information that they get down into the levels, and especially down into the teaching staff and the staff itself. And the more I think we can do that, I think the more positive messages could be sent out there, because they're just so, if you listen to them, you just find yourself saying, well, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
That explains it. And I think the more we can get that out, that good sense is coming out as a combined from this agency and the Department of Health, I think would just help things with easing maybe that nervousness that many of us have across the state.
Right.
I just wanted to make that comment. I just think they're very well done, and it's one of the best things I've seen.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I have another comment. Thank you so much for highlighting the Blue Ribbon schools. I'm so impressed by their success, and especially the Danbury one, because there you have the demographics of what is supposed to be a school of failure. You have high percentage of students that are from lower socioeconomic, ELS, second language learners, and they're doing well, and they're being successful. I do know that that the department uses those successes to sort of engage other schools and show them what is feasible and how it's done. But I think there's nothing more powerful than an example of what is doable. And I'm sort of sad that we couldn't have the principals here, maybe the children here, to see them and applaud them. That's one of the challenges. But maybe at some future meeting, even if it's remote, you can have the children waving at us. Socially distanced. I really, again, it's socially like the success in this time. And just wanted to say on behalf of my fellow board members, we are so proud of them. Thank you for
Thank you.
pointing them out and highlighting it. And I wish the press would do more about that instead of always being at the same time. Going on.
Thank you.
That's into report, Commissioner.
Yes.
I have a motion on 6A.
So moved.
There a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is John online?
Thank you. I believe Ajit's working the magic behind the scenes. What is that line from Wizard of Oz? Don't trust the wizard behind the green curtain. Well, I'm trusting the wizard behind the green curtain to make it work.
I'm watching his thumbs and they're moving with incredible rapidity.
I have to start calling him the wizard now.
Yeah. If not, I'm gonna.
Yeah, that's not our approved title for you, so.
So we'll give him a minute to prepare John Fasanelli's presentation on that.
You notice he's not commenting.
I know.
Ajit is being very quiet.
I can see both Desi and Charlene are texting. There we go. We're gonna have to get you a green curtain, Ajit. And there's John. All right.
The wizard is there.
I can breathe. Thank you. I'd like to turn it over now to Bureau Chief John Fasanelli.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Sorry to engage in a sobering subject, but thank you for having me here today. I also am joined by Scott Nugas. Scott is our social work consultant at the State Department of Education. Scott is our resident expert in social work and school safety, and so he's available to answer questions as well. So I'm here today to talk to you about the Firearm Safety Guide for Connecticut schools. The law that passed in 2019, Public Act 19-5, was titled Concerning the Safe Storage of Firearms in the Home and Firearm Safety Programs in Public Schools. That law is referred to as Ethan's Law. You may remember in 2018, Ethan Song was a 15-year-old in Guilford who was visiting a neighbor, a friend of his who was a neighbor, and they had access to firearms that were not properly stored. They actually had been accessing those firearms on a number of previous occasions, and were able to put them back in place without the other young man's parents noticing. And on this occasion, the gun went off and young Ethan lost his life. So Governor Lamont signed this public act in 2019, which actually strengthened some of the storage requirements around firearms in the home. It didn't matter whether the gun was loaded or stored with ammunition. There are new requirements for the storage and locking of those firearms in the home to prevent access and certainly to prevent another tragedy like that from reoccurring. So the section of the Public Act that we're going to discuss today is the requirement that the Board of Education develop guides for schools to use in developing curriculum to provide education to students at all levels in K-12 around firearm safety, particularly in the home. And it's important to note that while this is a curriculum component and will be discussed in schools, it certainly doesn't take the place of actions that are happening on the school level with regard to the development of school safety and security plans and other work that's happening. This is really another opportunity to have some conversation with students and also parents and communities about the potential dangers of firearms that are not stored appropriately. So the guide's intended to provide resources and guidance really on developmentally appropriate content for educating students in that regard. The rationale is really to scaffold the information from elementary, middle, and high school, beginning with basic critical guidance, certainly around avoidance, notification to adults, and safe behaviors, and then further more complicated conversations occur as we get higher up in the grades and certainly into high school. So this is really to help schools develop lesson plans and curricula around that. So specifically by grade band, the elementary grades we focus on and intended to ensure absolute avoidance of touching a firearm if you come into contact with it, identifying and notifying an adult if an elementary student comes in contact with a firearm. In the middle school grades, we build on that information. Certainly avoidance and communication with adults is a critical feature, but we talk about discussions on safe handling practices under adult supervision. We recognize, and this was one of the recommendations from the Legislative and Policy Subcommittee, that we recognize that students beginning in middle school may have access to firearms, may be participating in rifle clubs and hunting and target shooting, and other, safe and allowable utilization of firearms in their home, and that was an important conversation to have beginning in elementary school. High school grades, again, continue to build on those themes, but also add some discussions around the social and political context around firearms in the United States. We include a number of resources around both state and federal laws around gun ownership, around the social discussions around different groups around the support of firearms and the support of firearm restriction, and so that elevates the discussion in high school grades to encourage high school classrooms to have some respectful, responsible debate around the two sides of the delicate issue. So one of the areas that's not required under the statute, but we thought was critically important to include, is a section for families and caregivers and communities. Not only providing some content that they can speak to their children about to reinforce the concepts that they're learning in some school, but also to make sure that they're asking appropriate questions, that if they're gun owners, that they're responsible, and we outline the requirements under the state law and federal law with firearm ownership and storage and safeguarding, but also that, if their children are spending time at someone else's house, it's absolutely appropriate and necessary to ask about firearms in that person's home, and ensuring that both their children understand not to go near them, but also that they understand if and when there are firearms in the home, and ensuring that those are safely stored or put away when their child is spending time in someone else's home. Additionally, with regard to the curriculum content, part of the law does not require every student to participate. So if a family decides they don't want their child to participate in curriculum areas that discuss firearm safety, then they can certainly opt out of that in school. There are hundreds of resource pages from Journal of the American Medical Association articles. We engaged with the Children's Safety Network, which is a national organization that works with Maternal and Child Health Bureau and HRSA and injury prevention programs nationally. They have thousands of resources that we've included in this document. We've included congressional action around firearms, a number of additional laws and regulations, again, state and local. Also, the Association of State and Territorial Health Officers, so national PTO. So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of opportunities for folks to pull some documents out of the resource section. We have sample curriculum from different states for K through 5, et cetera. And so in developing this, again, Scott Nugas did a wonderful job at amassing all of this information. We coordinated with the Connecticut Police Chiefs Association. We coordinated with the Commissioner's Office at the State Department of Emergency Management and Public Protection and Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security at the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection is actually the entity that receives the school safety and security plans annually. And so we've engaged with them. We worked with the State Police Training Division at the Connecticut State Police Academy, and again, Children's Safety Network and a number of organizations around, public safety experts and experts around gun safety. So I'll pause there and happy to take any questions.
Anybody have questions?
Yes, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, I do have a question and probably a comment too. Has there been any consideration in terms of forming pilot programs for parents? Because I always say there's a time and place for everything. Every child has a phase of his or her life. okay? In terms of how do we communicate, the issue of having weapons in the households. So I wanted to ask, has there any consideration taken for pilot programs that could be implemented for parents and families in terms of when is the best time and how to communicate parents as to there are weapons in the house, because as we all know, not all the children and not all of my child's friends know that there's weapons in the household, because parents are afraid to tell and communicate to their own children that we have weapons because they don't know how, because of the whole sense of safety, like you mentioned earlier. So, there's many ways to create pilot programs, and you can use your social media and technology to assist parents in the communities. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a great suggestion. We do include language in the guide that encourages school districts to engage in their local community law enforcement agencies to work with community groups and parent groups to have specifically that conversation in their community. As you know, every community is different with regard to their feelings around this issue, and so it would be a great opportunity for them to convene parents about not only how they need to talk to their kids, but how the school district would like to implement such an education program. It's particularly important because some of the research does show that, particularly with young boys, a one-off conversation with youngsters about gun safety may initially lead them to be more likely to pick up a gun if they find it.
Absolutely.
And so that's in part why we included the family and community engagement aspect in this, because it can't be a singular conversation in the classroom. It really needs to be reinforced at home and back and forth. But Scott, I don't know if you had more information or thoughts on that.
No, I think you explained it well. The guidance that we received from the legislature was to develop guidance and not specific curriculum. And so local control within our state, of course, we would encourage schools to develop outreach to their community. And perhaps I think that's a great suggestion to have training and a task group to look at community-wide interventions. But within that framework, we do provide some recommendations about safe handling, safe storage, and how to have those discussions not only with students but also with parents within the community.
And this isn't a said and done. We don't when the ink's dry on this, we don't send it out and then we don't follow up. We will continue to be available for technical assistance. Scott's engaged in districts and schools all the time around this issue, so this is an ongoing opportunity for us to provide technical assistance as things evolve. And schools will tailor the conversation, again, according to their community. But
Thank you.
Anybody else have questions? John, I've got one. I don't understand what item 3 under additional points is actually saying, especially 3B, because alcohol isn't a constitutional right as opposed to the right to bear arms, which is specifically protected. The 18th Amendment prohibited the sale of alcohol, but when it was repealed or overridden, doesn't mean that alcohol is a right.
I'm sorry, what are you referring to?
Well, it's additional points to include with high school students.
Okay.
And
if I can respond to that.
3B in particular.
Right. Those were provided as examples to help teachers illustrate how controversial issues can change in status in terms of legality for the country at large. And it was intended to help explain some of the difficulties that we face in public opinion around possession of weapons, storage of weapons, and the like. So I included the one about the 18th Amendment because I thought that that was a very good example of enforcement that was put into place and then repealed as a result of community will. So it was to help high school students who are already, and part of the structure of the guide around high school students was specifically to help them in developing their own thinking, their own values, and their own approaches, which of course developmentally at that age they're going to. So rather than imposing upon them, giving them the tools to make good decisions around safety.
Okay, so it's not, you weren't getting into a discussion of the status of alcohol sales.
No, it was not intended to be a discussion about alcohol use and rights and the rest. As some of you may know, I'm deeply involved in substance use disorder responses and support. So I wouldn't include anything that encouraged use of substances in any way. It was merely meant around the legal conflicts that are often faced because of pressures within our society to address perceived needs, and that the values change over time. So whereas 40 years ago, owning a gun or a weapon was very well accepted, these days there are a lot of questions about it, and that's just a reflection of the changing timbre of political process. And that was what it was meant to include, was to help to link with other learning activities.
Okay, got it. Sounds very interesting. Thank you. Any further questions or comments?
Bob, you're on mute.
You have to vote challenge.
We have to,
Bob is speaking.
Bob
He's on
Trapani?
mute. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see you. Got Bob?
He's on mute.
He's on mute.
On me.
Bob, we can't hear you. Hold on.
Is he okay? Yeah.
There. Now you should be able to be heard, Bob. Go ahead.
That work?
Yeah.
John, this is kind of a bridge to your next topic on counseling. You know, I realize that this is about, you know, gun safety or the mechanics of gun safety, but it's also the conflict resolution. If we need to kind of parallel this with some things about how do you handle conflict, and how do you handle emotions, which is really part of the counseling part of it. You know, my experience in a lot of most of the uses of firearms that hurt someone else come from an emotional response and a conflict between parties that needs to be resolved in some way other than through violence or other than through the use of guns. And I would just, you know, you may want to think about a parallel kind of education around how to deal with conflict and the dangers of going too far with physical contact.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's all really in the larger context of social emotional wellness of students, right? So, not having systems in place in the school to support students emotionally, so that it doesn't arise to a level where a student feels like their only option is some type of violence.
Yeah, I guess not just in the school, but in, you know, outside of the school. Yeah, how do you resolve conflicts with your friends, with people that you have a beef with outside of the school environment, so that they don't turn to the use of violence and weapons to be able to do that. You know, we had a large security force when I was working in Washington D.C. We didn't arm those guys, and a friend of mine was running one of the other large hospitals in town. He did have his security guys armed, and he said the only time they used them when there was a beef between that particular person and somebody else. You know, there was it was a personal thing and the person used their firearm, didn't have anything to do with securing the place. It had something to do with the emotions between people. And I guess that always stuck with me. And so the more we can talk about how do you resolve conflict, hopefully that will reduce the weapons being used for harm.
Okay, we'll definitely look to make sure that's reflected in some of the resources and some of the language. And part of that discussion is around, specifically in the middle school instruction, which is around appropriate use and ownership of firearms and inappropriate use. And that's an important conversation. So thank you.
Thanks, John.
Any other comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay, could you ask everyone that's up there to raise their thumb or hand?
I'll ask that we vote for the online people that they raise their hands or fingers or something. So it's all in favor?
Thank you.
Those opposed can go like this. Those opposed can go like this.
Okay, so I guess that brings us to
Adoption of,
6D, is that where we are?
Yeah.
Have a motion?
So moved.
Or second?
Second, Karen.
Any discussion? I have to say, I love the phrase that students are healthy, joyous, and ready to learn. An important point. Anybody else? All in favor?
No, John, I think he's presenting.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Do we have a quick overview?
Yeah.
Okay, John?
Sure. I thought you were just moving along. Listen.
We want to get joyously.
So thank you. I'm joined by Kim Traverso, and if nothing else, it gives me an opportunity to highlight the incredible work that Kim does for the agency. Kim is our school counselor, and she has spent the better part of 2 years coordinating with the Connecticut School Counselors Association, the National Association of School Counselors, educators in higher ed around this topic area. And so over the course of time, she's developed 150 some odd pages of the Connecticut Comprehensive School Counselor Framework that really is soup to nuts about developing a system-wide school counseling program in Connecticut schools. So just briefly, this did come about as a result of a public act in 2019. Our work on this has sort of predated that a little bit. We had a guidance document from 2008, and this really updates that guidance document to reflect, the work that's really going on in schools. And so I always like to speak to the evolution of school counselors over the last decade or so, when we referred to them as guidance counselors. And so please don't refer to them as guidance counselors anymore. They are school counselors, because their role in school has really evolved from, helping a small population of students with college applications and career readiness, to really focusing on all aspects of children's social emotional development and wellness in schools, of course, academic performance, and of course, course selection, and of course, career counseling and career readiness. But the social emotional aspect and the wellness aspect of students is critically important and well documented, and I know has been a focus of this board and the department for a long time. And it's even more critical now as under the current circumstances of COVID, where more students are maybe engaged in academics, but it's harder to determine their social emotional stability over time. So part of the framework does talk about virtual support for students in addition to in-person support for students. And so what the position statement really does for us is solidifies the board's support of the comprehensive school counseling system in schools. And the other half of the position statement really focuses on the responsibilities of all of the parties that are stakeholders in students' education. And I know, Aaron, you brought this up in the Legislative and Policy Development Committee about making sure that schools, we have conversations with schools, and schools are working toward resources to be able to implement this in schools. So there are roles outlined in the position statement for school leaders, for school superintendents, around making sure that they're engaging in multidisciplinary teams to support students. They're engaging with community stakeholders. They're engaging with families. They're looking to resources to support school counseling. There are also specific roles for families, right? Families be authentically engaged in children's education and working with the school, making sure they're communicating with the school and the school is communicating with them on supporting all of the aspects of their child's education, from social, emotional, academic, career readiness, and all of those situations. And there's a call to action for students to be, engage in lifelong learning, be part of a positive school climate, and to work with school counselors for their own advancement in education. So thank you for the opportunity and for being willing to consider the board position statement on this. I think it will continue to elevate the importance of our student support personnel in the schools and supporting students. Thank you.
Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye. I'm going to raise your hand.
Oh, sorry.
I'll just you up there.
This is Martha. I have a question, if I can.
Oh, sorry, Martha, go ahead.
That's fine. I just wanted to clarify about how the future state of counselors, as described in this document, going forward is. It seems like they're taking on a lot more responsibility than they have in the past. As you say, you came from this model when you were career and college counselors to this greater model. What does that look like going forward? Or do you need more of them? Do you need more training? How are you going to meet all of the needs of these students?
Well, thanks. That's a great question, and it's really we really look at the role of the entire school on working together as a team, a multidisciplinary team to support all those aspects of students. So we're not necessarily moving school counselors ahead of or in place of social workers or school psychologists or others. We know actually the Department of Special Education is working on similar guidance around school psychologists and social workers. And what we've always said when we talk about numbers of support personnel, whether that's counselors or social workers or psychologists, is it's really the role of, and we really rely on school leaders to look at their resources and be able to identify the support personnel that are necessary based on their needs, right? So depending on the needs of certain schools, you might have more counselors in a school than social workers, depending on what's happening in the school. And I know Kim probably has some comments on this, so I'm going to ask Kim to say a few words with regard to that.
Hi, everyone. That's a great question. And I think we have been, honestly, Martha, I think we've been doing this work for a very long time. I know that the first guidance came out in 2008, but I think we were missing some components. And one major component was the idea around equity. And when I say equity, I'm talking about fair and just, responses to all of our kids. So kids who feel disenfranchised and kids who also feel marginalized. And so with this document, we've also coalesced multi-tiered systems of support in relation with or blended with the ASCA model. And with that, we feel that we have more systems in place so that we can actually be able to do those three domains, which is academics, career, and social emotional learning. And so now that we have this system in place, I think it's going to be more organized. And I think we're going to be able to do a great deal of work because we're more targeted and more focused on what the actual, we're targeted on the actual guidelines and model.
Malia?
Thank you. Kim and John, I'm curious. So I'm very data focused and very much attuned with school counseling, just from my own sort of background interest. Bringing those two things together, we talk about, and I think Johnny just referenced, based on what the identified needs are of the school. How do we quantify what that is? Is there a way to quantify that, to really elevate that equal importance of the social emotional health of students in schools that allow us to justify and make the decisions that are necessary to ensure that there are the resources to support the social emotional learning? And I'm particularly thinking about that now, as we had the report from the commissioner on at least knowing what attendance is, right, and engagement in a very sort of logistical way. But that doesn't at all speak to, okay, but how are they doing, right? Like, what's the nature of that engagement, and are they actually doing okay? And we don't have a sense of that. So I'm just curious, are there sort of quantifiable measures that we use or that you are using to help elevate that?
And let me just start, and then I'll ask him to respond. And it's a great point, and it's a great question, because we recognize that particularly with remote learning, that it's a challenge to identify some of that. Certainly even harder as teachers are trying to teach, that it's even harder to identify some of those issues. One of the things that we engaged in, and we partnered with the Connecticut Children's Medical Center experts on pediatric development and the Child Health and Development Institute to create resources and actually a video to assist schools, school leaders, teachers, counselors, and others to recognize and to provide some comfort to those kids who may be remote and being able to identify some of those issues remotely. So that's a very small part of it, but I know I'm going to turn it over to Kim for the school counselor perspective.
Thank you. I love that question, so thank you so much. And that is really the new school counselor. That is really the shift from guidance counselor to school counselor, is looking at data. And that is why we also got the higher ed counselor educators involved with this whole process, is because we also, when they're in pre-service, they have to learn how to look at data and understand what data pieces they need to look at. So just to give you an overview of the guide, we talk about continuous improvement. We talk about, looking at tier 1 as far as what all kids are going to get, so that we can assess where they're at. And they all do needs assessments. There could be a need assessment that is developed through the school counseling office, or they can use other data formats like surveys, school climate surveys, parent surveys, and so on and so forth. But that is the foundation for building, okay, what is it that we need to do? And do we have the right resources available? And if not, why not? And looking at the gaps. And number 2 is really looking at what programming we already have that exist, and are those programs aligned to what the needs are? And if not, then we need to make those adjustments as well. So in that document, we really do talk about that. We also look at disaggregated data. We're looking at discipline data. We're looking at chronic absenteeism, mobilization. We are even looking at academic performance as well, so that we can look at it from across the spectrum to see where our kids are lying, so that we can actually catch them early on. That's the whole idea around the early preventative tier 1. We also will look at the threshold. So what is a determining factor for us to decide that now we need to give more support. And each school obviously is going to be different in regards to that, but they do understand what that threshold is in order to make that determination.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I just wanted to comment, Kim and John, that in working in a higher education setting and then working at K through 12 years ago, is that I kept hearing that the guidance counselors, right, now called school counselors, are overwhelmed with cases of students. And I realized that you broke it down by academic, career, social, emotional, but that could embark a lot of other, okay, encounters that they face with our kids in the schools. My heart goes out to them because they do a tremendous job. They do a great job, when it comes to supporting them. But their caseload has become extremely higher, and I know that that's been looked at, and I hope that continues to be some consideration, continues to be taken seriously on those cases. Because we all know that if they're overwhelmed, our students are not going to be as productive as they should be in getting ready for their careers, or when it comes to their social, emotional, okay, and so forth. So that's very important, because that's all I kept hearing throughout the years. I'm overwhelmed, Awilda. I'm very overwhelmed with my caseload, and I'll get to you, and they will. But it's just my heart goes out to them because of that ratio. So it's, and I'm taking that's being looked at.
Yes, definitely. And the resource issue is one that we're looking into as well. Deputy Commissioner Russell Tucker and I and others have been meeting with our partners at the Department of Social Services and the Commissioner's Office to look at ways in which we can utilize state and federal Medicaid funding to support behavioral health supports in schools. And so we've just sort of restarted that conversation, but it looks promising that there may be opportunities to get some resources through Medicaid reimbursement into schools to support the work that school counselors are already doing.
Okay, thank you.
Charlene?
So John, thank you so much for adding that context. In our committee meeting, I know that board member Karen Walton asked about resources as well, and so thank you for sharing that. We started that conversation with DSS pre-COVID because we really knew that this was an area that we needed to shore up supports for, and the commissioner was really interested, or both commissioners were part of the initial meeting, saying we got resources here, how can we get those resources to support counselors and other behavioral health professionals in classrooms, like physically in classrooms, locally. And so that conversation is restarted, and as John said, very promising for us to be able to tap into, so that with two state agencies working together, tapping into sources of federal funding to support our counselors and behavioral health in general. So that's going very well, and we'll keep you updated on that.
Thank you. That sounds like a potentially extremely useful initiative. Any other questions or comments? We need to take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. Inclement weather.
Thank you. I want to thank John, Kim, and Scott Nugas also for their presentation and going into the matter that are extremely important. I'm going to turn it over to our legal director.
I guess I should put on have a motion. Second. Okay. Jessa?
Hi, how are you? Jessa Myrtle, legal director at SBE. This is an unusual meeting time, as we know, and I want to first acknowledge and thank Nancy Louise, the bureau chief in my office, and also Dr. Stephanie Dixon in Charlene's area, who have been fielding or helping to facilitate responses to hundreds and hundreds of questions from our constituents, our educators, our families, and also our superintendent. And one of the questions that has come in, particularly after the board's decision to allow for remote learning flexibility in the context of the pandemic, is around inclement weather. And what does this mean for inclement weather days, again, during this unique time? And one of the reasons that this question was raised is because, as we know, schools are using so many different models, and there's potential for sometimes rapid switching between models or need for flexibility around remote and hybrid learning. And the question that's arising is really twofold. One is whether, if there's an instance where there are hybrid models, if there's some students in the school building, and other students who are remote learning, what would that mean for an inclement weather day? And are we setting up a scenario where some students who would be in school don't have access to continued educational opportunities on a snow day, while other students are already planned to be remote? Or if all students are remote, what does that mean in the context of inclement weather? So what we're proposing is that the State Board of Education instructs the State Department of Education to provide some guidelines around inclement weather during this unique context of the pandemic, and in which we have authorized remote learning to act as a provision of education to our students. And we acknowledge that it's only because of these unique circumstances that we would consider this as something that needs to be allowed for during the pandemic. We would, in these guidelines, after vetting with the appropriate folks, both in the department as well as the board, ensure that we are addressing what the authorization may be, which could include a threshold number of days where there should in fact be an inclement weather day called, and an acknowledgement that there may be instances where remote learning wasn't an option that was feasible, such as if there was broad connectivity issues or if there was a loss of power in town or something to that effect. So we wanted to ensure that we had the opportunity to think about this and to ensure that we were providing guidelines to towards local boards of education because of the unique context that we have before us during the pandemic.
Yes. Thank you. You did a nice job explaining it, Jess. To be very frank, this is a timely conversation. I brought it up at the last meeting. What I want to do is stay ahead of this and not have it be something that becomes problematic later. I think, having an opportunity for the State Department of Education to come up with some guidelines to make sure that we're protecting the quality of the experience is critically important, while also being realistic and saying, listen, we're approving remote days for students every day in some cases, and in other cases, it's a big part of the model. So if we're able to provide opportunities for students to learn online that meet that threshold of quality, then we should be able to allow it under this pandemic emergency. So that would be my recommendation, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Chair has no report. Financial matters.
Roger. Roger, remember Roger,
Right. We have Roger Person who will be joining the call, and I know he is probably working behind the scenes to get him on.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Actually, I'm going to defer to Leah Grenier on this. As she's been working closely with Kathy in developing these options, and I apologize for that.
Thank you, Roger, and Leah. Thank you for joining us and for providing this information. We'll turn it over to you now.
You'll need a motion.
We won't turn it over to you yet. Wait for the motion.
May I have a motion to adopt?
Thank you.
Did you move it?
Yes.
Okay.
Eric.
Moved and
Brennan
seconded.
and Clemens.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Again, Leah Grenier, and I am an education consultant under Roger and Kathy. I won't go read through the document you have. You can use that and if you have questions I'd be happy to answer them. For the reduction options, this is a pretty much annual exercise from OPM in that they ask agencies to reduce their budgets due to some fiscal constraints in the state. So this year's target was 10%, and if you scroll down to the last page of the document, you'll see the reduction columns for both years, and a lot of accounts have done less than the 10%. The total for reductions are 81 million in the first year of the budget and 86 million in the second. I do want to point out just 3 areas: the health and welfare services for private pupils, adult education, and excess cost. Those reductions are actually flat funding those grants to this year's funding level. And that's, again, another pretty much annual reduction that occurs, that those grants are flat funded. Moving on to the reallocation, there are 2 reallocations. One would provide for a new account for bilingual education, which would provide funding directly to districts. And this is essentially funding that isn't going out through the funding formula per statute, but has been lapsing the last several years because there is no funding mechanism for that funding. So we need to reallocate it and distribute it to districts in need of bilingual education funding. The second reallocation option is essentially a technical adjustment for chef transportation costs. A couple of years ago, a new account for chef transportation was included in the budget, and this would just reallocate some funding that was missed in the magnet school program into the chef transportation line item. And then finally, there's one expansion option that would provide for seats at Stanford Academy for Excellence for their grade level increase. And that is pretty much it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
And if I could, before we take questions or any comments, I just want to share that, part of this pandemic is the impact that it has on the economy. And we recognize that every agency will have to revisit their finances, their budget, how they're spending money. This agency is no exception. ECS formula is not something that we feel should be touched or could be touched, and it's not going to be. But there's an area that I think, and she mentioned it briefly, moving some funds from an entitlement grant, bilingual education entitlement grant, to more general district support for bilingual education and English learners is something that I feel very strongly about. I think the budget for bilingual education is woefully low, and it's no surprise to me that the needs and supports that we want to offer, the funding for that is not there to the extent that it's needed. And if you look at the outcome data for our English learners, which is one of the largest growing subpopulations of students, it's time that we kind of bolster that up. And part of the plan there is for our Director of Equity and Language to really do a landscape analysis of what's happening in Connecticut with English learners, maybe what's not happening, and how we can support those districts to build their capacity to meet the needs of learners. I appreciated when Kim Traverso talked about Tier 1. Basically, Tier 1 is what everybody gets, right? So I think if we're focusing on improving our Tier 1 for our English learners, that's going to help. But there might be some districts that need additional either capacity or guidance around how to meet the needs of the English learners that are perennially underperforming. So that's an area of focus. Despite there being a need to really tighten our spending, this is something that I feel is critically important if we're going to continue to deliver our message of making sure all students in Connecticut have a chance to succeed. But thank you, Leah, for the overview.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I do have a question, concern for the reallocation to the Sanford Charter School. I do understand, and Kathy is not on the call, and who helps the Legislation Policy Committee. Malia and Don, you probably can remember our school choice discussions and statements that we have worked on for actually 2 years. It started 2 years ago. We were never able to bring that statement to the full board because we didn't have a quorum, but it very much talks about the funding and the lack of funding to address the inequity of our, in particular, our ACS funding. And Kathy Dempsey did a lot of work with us, with the committee. I think it's great. I understand why we're going through, but it worries me that we're going forward for one school when we've had this discussion. Being that it's been in committee for 2 years, it definitely will go back on the agenda. We delayed it with no quorum. We delayed it again in the fall, and then we have the pandemic. But and just remind some of the board members and new board members, this is going to be brand new to you. This was brought forward with the chair previous to when I was chair. The major concern, the VOAG department, the VOAG schools, the tech schools, the balance of the equity of the funding. And so when I see this come on here, I can just see Joe and Bill out there flipping. I think we need to, I understand this after being, Desi sort of gave me the briefing on this. I understand it, but I do think it's also important that we just don't allocate for one school when we've had this discussion now for 2 years that really has not moved forward. And I think it's now time that in committee we start moving that forward and allocating funding for more than just one school. So I just wanted to see that on the record that this will be something Legislation and Policy bring up again, because it, as you remember, this board in July, we voted not to allow the expansion because we kept saying there was no funding to do so. And now I understand it, but now we're giving them that open door. To me, it just seems like the legislation should pass the seats and then come to us for the funding. It just seems a little backward to me. And I just wanted to go on record saying that. And I don't expect, Roger, Lee, I don't want to put you on the spot. I know you weren't working with us. And Kathy, did numerous documents for us. And that, Kathy will be coming back to the Legislation and Policy Committee to help us get through this. So.
Sure, and maybe for the benefit of the folks that weren't in that room when those conversations happened in the subcommittee, Desi, could you provide a quick overview of kind of?
Well, I think to your point, Aaron, I think it's probably time to revisit the conversations that happened with policy and legislation and Kathy. Sounds like it started about 1 year ago, 2 years ago, around the prioritization of the recommendations for allocation of the funding. So I think to have a chance to reconnect with Kathy, you guys on policy and legislation, to revisit where that conversation left off and what some of the goals are of this board when it comes to how we should provide, or at least advocate for funding for choice as an umbrella. I don't think it's specific to magnet or charter, but I think the conversation is more broad about choice and what the board's priorities are financially so that these things reflect that.
Right. So charter schools were very much part of that whole discussion too. They were, but now we're, this allocation is just for one school.
But I think, and I recall Bill Davenport, our conversations, really good conversation where he helped me understand when I came on board some of the advocacy there. However, it does also in response to the process that was not being followed in the past, where they were coming to us during a meeting to ask for more seats, and we said there's a different process to follow that, Desi?
Yeah, so that's part of it, and part of it is the number of charters that have closed. There have been off the top of my head, I think 2 or 3 that have closed in the past couple of years. And so part of that larger conversation around that pot of funding, that possibly be reallocated to a school like a Stanford Charter School for Excellence, one of the top performing schools in the state, so on and so forth. You all are intimately familiar since we just did this. It feels like 2 months ago. It might have been longer. I didn't remember now, but you all know this particular school very well in its history and its track record.
we actually had just for the new board members, I actually had a statement that we worked on for Malia. Was it over a year? I don't recall. Malia might remember. She was very much part of it. But I believe, we revisited that statement so often. When it was ready to go, we no longer had a quorum. So the full board, it never came to the full board because we had no quorum to pass it. And then, just pushing down the line, new commissioner, new pandemic, and it just, yeah.
Oh, thank you, sir. I too am very concerned about when we talk about the umbrella of school choice, that when I see that VOTEC is being reduced by 2.5, that VOAG is being reduced by 1.5, how do you get to those numbers in terms of how that reduction is going to take place in FY22 and FY23?
Leah or Roger, you guys able to speak to the reduction piece?
It could also just mean a lower, for the VOAG, a lower per pupil, so not necessarily a reduction is in seats, but yes, I do see your point of differing methods for choice programs.
So can you tell me how you got to the point where this would come out of VOAG and VOTEC? How was that choice made?
It was
Kathy? Yeah.
So if I could jump in here, I think the reductions of equal the amount that we had to propose were being put out there. Doesn't mean that it would end there. But I think a further discussion on your specific question would require Kathy's presence because she put it together. In fairness to Leah and Roger who are jumping in, and I appreciate that. I think your question deserves a better detailed response based on what led to this. There were some accounts we couldn't touch. There were some we could, and we said, well, this would be to get us to that up to 10%, but we know we may not get to 10%. So these would be things that would be prioritized. So just in fairness to the question, I also want to give you that opportunity to hear a response that led to why we got there. So I guess, and I'm looking to Jess how that could be done in a way that, I don't know if that's a conversation or a subgroup committee meeting, or maybe we break it up and
Can
communicate.
this be tabled until, or is this something of time sensitivity?
It is time sensitive, but I would want there to be the proper conversation and answers to the questions that are being asked before you ask to vote on something.
Okay.
So could I'm not sure with Robert's rules how I can take this and bring it somewhere else and maybe have a special conversation next week or one item. I'm not sure, Jess. I'm looking at you to.
So you're indicating that you want the full board to.
Well, obviously, I want to make sure that people have, before they're voting on anything, that they have their questions answered.
So basically you're tabling it?
Tabling it,
We need to table it to the next board meeting or decide if there was a necessity for a special board meeting in order to review and vote with Kathy present.
Okay. So that's what I would recommend.
Is tabling it for a special meeting because there's some urgency to it?
Laura, can you give me the timeline on when this has to be moved forward?
I think it's time sensitive.
Yeah, Leah, can you share with us the timeline on getting this to OPM? Do you know that?
Yes, actually, it was submitted per OPM and statutory requirements. The options were due October 1st, so they were already submitted to OPM.
We could, but I still want to have the conversation, and if we have to send in and adjust it, we will. So I want to table it, and if it's okay with this board, I don't know whether or not I can check with Kathy to see if moving it to the next board meeting would be too far along. If not, I would ask for a special meeting.
Somebody has to do a
Let me move that we table it. I think, one of the board members has to do the table. So.
For the record, though, you're not tabling, you're postponing.
Okay.
You cannot table.
I like postponing it.
You gotta postpone it.
If we table it, we have to be 6 feet.
Well, that's nice. No, the table is, you gotta deal with it today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question for Jessica. maybe this is common practice, but is it, now that we're hearing that it's already been submitted, is that common practice that it's submitted before this board votes on it?
I think they do that. I think when I was in the state board of, in the CSU system, you know, the paperwork was pending approval before it comes back, with OPM required. So I'm not saying that's the best way to approach it, but I'm saying, you know, OPM.
Well, if it says pending board approval, that's,
yeah.
I don't know if it says that, but I was a little surprised to hear that it's submitted.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that question off the top of my head, but it's certainly something we can look into and make sure that we're
I think that's,
offering us options.
yeah, that's the way that the, you know, the OPM is required.
So, the motion.
Alan, can I move to, postpone
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
the discussion on?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
There's a question up there. Are they voting?
They're voting. They're voting.
Oh, my God.
Okay, where are we? I can't read.
Consent agenda.
Consent agenda, okay. Motion on the consent agenda.
So moved. Yeah.
Second.
Thank you.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I guess that brings us to item 10A. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the agency update really is B. That should be under age. The agency update is the increase of racial, ethnic, and linguistic diversity of the Connecticut educator workforce. So Dr. Shawana Tucker will be joining us in a second. And as she does that, I want to preface the presentation by sharing that I believe it was at a board meeting last time, the request to have updates on some of the past goals and the progress that has been made toward the past goals was requested. This is an example of something that in our talent office has been the priority over the last go-around of goals. And Shawana Tucker will kind of guide us through some of the progress made on the racial, ethnic, and linguistic diversity of Connecticut educator workforce. And then kind of share some of the plans that she has moving forward. I'm really excited about what you're going to be seeing, and I'm really thrilled that Dr. Tucker is on our team. She's been with us several months now. I think that this was the last meeting before the pandemic where she was approved. And, you know, a tremendous amount of work has been done since then to not only, you know, acknowledge the work that's been done before, but also continue to move us forward as we look to increase the racial and ethnic diversity of our workforce. So I'll turn it over now to Dr. Tucker.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Ajit, can I be heard?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great, wonderful. All right, and the presentation is up. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Chairman Taylor, Vice Chair Lopez, and board members. I'm very pleased to be with you today, along with my colleague, Christopher Todd. We're going to provide you with an update on our department efforts and strategies focused on increasing the racial, ethnic, and linguistic diversity of the Connecticut educator workforce and share our next steps. Our mission in the talent office is to develop and deploy talent management strategies statewide and ensure that all students have access to great teachers and leaders, preparing them for global success. While we support educators across the entire career continuum, from attraction to certification, induction support through team, educator evaluation, support and recognition, this presentation provides an overview of the Talent Office initiatives aligned specifically with our efforts to transform Connecticut's educator workforce. Next slide. The state and district leaders in Connecticut are committed to ensuring that our educator workforce reflects the rich racial and cultural diversity of our state. In 2016, the State Board of Education adopted a 5-year comprehensive plan ensuring equity and excellence for all of our students, which outlined 3 broad goals. The first goal was high expectations for all students. Second goal, great schools. Third goal, great teachers and leaders. The research is clear All students benefit from positive exposure to individuals from a variety of races and ethnic groups, especially in childhood, which can help to reduce stereotypes, decrease unconscious implicit biases, and help promote cross-cultural social bonding. As such, the State Department of Education established the goal to increase the number of educators of color from 8.3% to 10% by 2021. We are pleased to report this morning our progress towards that 10% goal and the hiring of over 1,000 new educators of color since 2015-2016, which we will be speaking to in a forthcoming slide. Next slide.
Good morning, everyone. The CSDE is proud of the upward trend in the percentage of educators of color serving in Connecticut schools. However, the department recognizes there is still much work to do. The October 2019 reporting data indicates that 9.6% of educators actively employed in Connecticut schools, approximately 4,864 educators, were educators of color. Of those 4,864 educators, 521 were serving in administrative roles this past year. While the overall number of actively employed educators remains somewhat fluid, taking into consideration retention from year to year, retirements, and those educators who choose to exit the profession, the percentage of Connecticut's workforce comprised of educators of color continues to trend upward. Next slide. Thank you. Our progress made to date has been the result of the collective action and efforts of many different organizations and groups. Legislation passed during the past 5 years has assisted us in attaining this goal. For example, Public Act 1610 helped create educator pathway programs, and Public Act 1834, which called for the development of the Minority Teacher Recruitment and Policy Oversight Council, has helped guide and provide input into our work. Members of the MTR Council are from a variety of backgrounds and organizations with whom we partner on some of our most important initiatives. Additionally, educator preparation program providers, or EPPs, have continued to partner and engage in ongoing conversations about their applicant pools, and the forthcoming slide will highlight Title II data showing an upward trend in the enrollment of candidates of color across all of Connecticut's EPPs. We continue to focus on 3 strategies which have assisted us in moving the needle in the right direction. Next slide. During the past 5 years, we have continued to provide ongoing support to both our traditional and alternate route educator preparation program providers, specific to persistent shortage areas and those of which align with our goal of diversifying the educator pipeline. Since 2018, the State Board has granted full approval to new educator preparation programs to certified educators in shortage areas. These include the University of Hartford's Initial Educator Program in Special Education, Southern Connecticut State University's Integrated Elementary and Bilingual Program, and Fairfield University's Comprehensive Special Education Program. We've also, through the State Board, have approved 3 additional alternate route to certification programs, which have created greater access for individuals to pursue their certification. These programs have included TFA's Bilingual Program, Relay's program, and the Correct Residency Program. An emphasis has been placed on paraeducators and creating pathways for them as well. For those holding bachelor's degrees and wish to pursue certification, there are avenues for them to do so. For example, both the CREC and the Relay ARC programs focus on supporting candidates of color. Some districts in Connecticut have partnered with both entities and are financially supporting candidates, specifically candidates of color, financially by offering scholarships, stipends, and/or tuition reimbursements to help offset the course costs. The Relay program offers endorsements areas in several certification areas and is currently in their 5th cohort as of 2020. This cohort is comprised of 32 educators from traditional school districts. 74% are identified as female, 24% as male, 2 represent gender non-binary. 81% of those identified are educators of color, which is inclusive of Black, Hispanic, 2 or more races. Another example would be the Correct Residency Program, which leads to an endorsement in elementary education. Currently, they have 12 residents enrolled for the school year. Of the 12, 6 are male, 6 are female, 75% of which are Black, 16.7% are Latinx, and 8.3% are 2 or more races. Next slide, please. table reflects the number of students enrolled in teacher preparation programs as identified by race and ethnicity. For example, the number of American Indian or Alaskan Native students has decreased, while the number of Asians, Blacks, or African American, or two or more races and Hispanic Latino have increased. Candidates who identify as Black or African American have increased from 94 candidates in the 2015-2016 reporting year to 287 in the 2018-19 reporting year. Latinx candidates enrollment grew from 218 in 2015-16 to 448 in the 2018-19 reporting year. It's important to point out that Title II data is delayed by 2 years because of reporting delays. And so the 2018-19 is projected figures at this point for the department. We find this information very telling as there continues to be ongoing miscommunications and misinformation and around the perceptions regarding the number of candidates of color that are enrolled in educator preparation programs. Additionally, this upward trend speaks to the work of the department and this board to approve new pathways and preparation programs and to the intentional work of our EPPs to recruit and enroll a more diverse applicant pool.
Can I ask a question on this table? It looks like there has been a very substantial increase in the total number of candidates between 2017-18 and 2018-19. Just looking quickly, every one of those significant numbers is up and by a large number. How did that happen?
That is correct, Chairman Taylor. So as what we're seeing is that there has been an uptick in enrollment. So we're hoping that once Title II and the federal government officially publish these numbers that are projected numbers, which we've pulled from the preliminary report submissions to the federal government, will hold true. I think what that would highlight is, that despite some of the public dialogue around the profession, I think the work of the talent office and districts and really promoting as a department, promoting the profession as a whole, we are seeing a shifting in trend of more enrollment across our EPPs.
Oh, go ahead, Malia.
I just wanted to follow up on that, right? So there's two pieces of this story then. So good news, more candidates, but I don't know if it's a bad news or I don't think it's bad news, but if we're looking at percentages, then what does that actually look like, right? Is everyone just sort of equally, I'm not quickly doing the math, so. But,
I think that's a fair question. I think one of the things that we can point out is that our candidates of color enrolled in our Ed Prep programs has continuously grown from 2015 to what we're projecting for 2018-19 reporting year, which would be approximately 16.5% of all candidates enrolled in EPP across the state. Obviously, that number varies from program to program depending on what specifically we're looking at. But I think what's positive is that the 16.5%, not only is it an upward trend, but it's also higher than what we're seeing as a state overall trend of educators of color working in Connecticut schools. So we're hoping that as that trend continues with the candidate pools across our EPPs, we'll continue to see more exponential growth in the profession as a whole, which is also indicated in our new hiring data, which Dr. Tucker will speak to in a forthcoming slide.
How does the significant growth in students in the program relate to the number of positions and that exit from the field, the number of people leaving the field, creating opportunities?
I think it's a fair question. Our data regarding educators employed in Connecticut in any given year is quite fluid. So from any given year, we can see anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 shift in the overall workforce that's actively employed in the state of Connecticut. So I think that the challenge for us is that as our Rockefeller Institute report shows that we are having teachers exit the profession faster than we're preparing teachers through our Ed Prep programs. So despite seeing some, promising figures from our 18-19 data that there is a jump in enrollment in Ed Prep programs, our Rockefeller Institute report definitely highlighted the fact that more educators are leaving the profession at a faster rate than we're backfilling. So in some ways, we can make the argument that that creates more openings and availability for educators entering the profession to find jobs and employment within our Connecticut districts. I think it also raises the bigger concern is, are we going to be facing a shortage of certified educators in the forthcoming years if our preparation does not keep up with those exiting?
Well, this is Woody. Do you have information?
Oh, Woody, hold on. Woody was speaking. Who else was speaking?
Malia.
I was going to speak to retirement and just state that for those who think that there has been a mass exodus of retirement, we have data from TRB, who we work with very closely, and there has not been over the past 3 years a huge exodus of people retiring. That data has pretty much trended around the same amount over the past 3 years.
Thank you. Now, let's go to Woody and
this is Woody.
Let them take care of it now,
Okay.
Does the department have data on whether teachers of color are leaving the profession at a faster rate than other teachers?
We do have some preliminary data that was done through the Rockefeller Workforce Study Report, where we tried to look at cohorts of educators. So this is definitely a piece that we're looking at in this forthcoming year when Dr. Tucker lays out some strategies. We spent a lot of time, and what we're going to highlight in the past is looking at the hiring and selection of candidates, and really phase 2 or part 2 of that work is looking specifically at retention. So I don't have any of those numbers immediately available for you today, but we would be able to pull those numbers for you.
Mm-hmm. Karen.
Dr. Tucker's last point spoke to what I'm wondering about with this data is that there are, yes, more students of color, but there are overall lots more white students in the pool as well in the educator program. The percentages, my numbers show that there haven't been significant shifts in the percentage difference between white students enrolled and students of color enrolled. And that coupled with not a lot of people coming out, I think it's important that there be a focus on placement of these students upon graduation into roles, and how we ensure that this pipeline of students of color actually equates to hiring in every district in the state, not simply in districts that have a lot of students of color. Sorry. Sorry about that. So that we're focused on that as well. I think that can relate to hires.
Yes, and I will say further along in the report, we will share some of the things that we've been doing and the resources that we've been providing to districts regarding hiring. I think it's really important for people to understand we have no control over the hiring within the districts. Right. However, we are providing districts with the needed resources that they need so that they can diversify their talent pool. And we also have some moving forward next step initiatives that we are also working on to address that as well.
Thank you. Malia, did you have a question?
Woody asked my question, and Karen did the follow-up, but then to what Dr. Tucker was just mentioning in terms of who has the power, and the word incentive comes to mind to me in terms of what sort of incentives are then provided or provided to districts to placing candidates of color within their district. And I think, I just wonder what the opportunity is for the department to play in conversations with either the legislature or districts themselves in terms of creating these sorts of incentives that speak to workforce development as well as meeting the educational needs of our. So not necessarily more of a theoretical hypothetical question, but.
And I will say that that is a common theme across many districts. They are having and have had those conversations about incentivizing. I do know in some districts for shortage areas, when they are hiring persons in the shortage areas, they don't hire them at step 1. They make concerted efforts to bring them in at a step 2 or a step 3, depending on the shortage area. However, many do grapple with, if we want to offer a bonus or some type of incentive, they're trying to figure out creative ways to build that into their district budget. So those conversations are being had.
Did somebody, and thank you, in the room?
I had a question. So can you tell me if there are any special initiatives to get to the Native Americans that we've got here in the state? I see the numbers, that's the only category where the numbers are going down. Have there been conversations with the tribal council to see about elevating the opportunities that they can do to come into this field?
Since I have been here, there have not been any discussions with that population, but that is something that we can definitely look into, because that is the category where we have seen a decrease.
Yeah.
Mrs. Woody,
Hold on, Woody. Don's got it.
Well, I remain concerned about the numbers, which I think are still very low for potential teachers of color. As I have said in past meetings, and I've said in front of the legislature, and I've said for numbers of years, where are these teachers coming from? Because I know it's still very difficult to get into the higher ed or the college teacher prep programs, because they've got a standard so high, it's very difficult to get in there. Are we doing anything to encourage incentives, for our students of color, Black and brown students, to get into these programs? Or are they coming from these other pathways?
I want to answer you, Don, because I'm very interested in this presentation. So what I did, I asked Adit for the data, not on students enrolled, students of color enrolled, but degrees awarded to students of color for the past 3 years by the 4 CSU institutions, which are the major
process. She became Teacher of the Year right after that, and then now a Congresswoman. But she talked about that a great deal, that as a teacher, she was doing everything she possibly could with her students to have them look at her as a person, the whole, mirrors and window type of thing. Look at her and say, you can do this. And that's all it takes is one that says you can do this. But Don, to we have to follow them. We can't just, oh, good, you got accepted. Well, what about how you're going to pay for it? Something happens, a pandemic, and they don't go, So I think we need to take them further too. But I'm hoping that Ed Rising is going to be just the same.
Yeah, thank you.
Thrilled to see that.
And I know we're on page 4 of the report. So I'm probably ready to jump in at every point. Listen, and I appreciate the passion. I appreciate the passion. Having gone through and having a teacher point out to me, hey, would you consider? I've been there as a student in a K-12 system, as the only Latino in a teacher prep program, and then as a Latino teacher in a school where I felt like I was a one-up. So I personally can connect to this. What I will say is that there's enough work to go around. Our K-12 system is not graduating Black and brown kids at the rate that it should, or at the level that they should, so that they have choices in their life. And in some cases, their experiences are so substandard that they don't want to go back. Education is not what I want to do. I want to get out.
I think I want to
So we need to tie this into the conversation about how we're addressing achievement disparities, getting a good tier one, getting a culturally responsive pedagogy and curriculum out there so these kids feel engaged, consider a career in teaching. We need to make sure that bridge is there to the colleges, and then we don't let them go. And then we have to make sure that they're finishing well. And that the higher ed and K-12 partnership needs to be tight. The Ed Rising program is exciting. I think there's a through line between all of this. Dr. Tucker's been a part of Waterbury, part of New Britain, part of the expansion of it. So, you know, I definitely want to let the board members who want to speak, but I also want to give them an opportunity to share some of this exciting stuff that's going to happen because we need to move forward. We need to move forward aggressively. And I am excited about this. There's a lot of work to be done. Some progress has been made, and I thank Chris Todd for doing a great job also, you know, in between chiefs. But we really need to put the pedal down and move forward with this because it's good for all kids. And as Karen mentioned, and I appreciate that comment, this is not just for New Haven, Hartford, Bridgeport, Meriden. This is for all of Connecticut. So with that, I just want to put an exclamation point on that one and see if it's possible to go back to our Chris Todd and Shawana Tucker to continue. But if other board members wanted to make a comment before that, feel free to do that.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Strategy 2, supporting our districts and our LEAs. That has been the focus. We've partnered with numerous statewide, regional, and national education organizations to develop the needed resources to support districts and LEAs specifically around attracting, recruiting, hiring, and retaining a diverse educator workforce. They include the EdKnowledge online repository, which hosts promising practices and models of success to attract, support, and develop and retain educators of color. This information is available on the CSDE website. The guidebook for hiring and selection. This is a new resource available on our website. It has been promoted and piloted this year with several Connecticut school districts. We have the REL NEI pilot project to develop workforce diversity plans. The Talent Office and 8 district partners have been engaged in a 4-part series to develop workforce diversity plans. Our work continues with these 8 districts with the possibility of engaging a second cohort in 2020-21. The RESC MTR Alliance contract. Each of our 6 regional education service centers convened a diverse group of local educators to problem solve around attracting, recruiting, hiring, supporting, and retention strategies to develop workforce diversity plans. Each group met several times this past year with the opportunity to apply for a mini grant to design and implement a project to meet an identified goal. The New England Secondary School Consortium Great Schools Partnership with Minority Teacher Recruitment Task Force, the CSDE and district partners, excuse me, which are Windsor, Hartford, and Bristol, collaborated with a group of diverse educators from each of the New England states in a series of in-person and virtual convenings to develop guidance and resources for increasing workforce diversity in each of the New England states. And last but not least, Leading for Equity, with the support from the Wallace Foundation University Principal Preparation Initiative grant, the CSDE designed a 2020 professional learning series with content aligned to preparing and supporting equity-driven leadership. Next slide. In addition to the upward trend in the overall percentage of educators of color within our workforce, the Talent Office is pleased to show that efforts aimed at supporting districts with their own attraction, recruitment, and hiring practices and strategies are also showing gains. According to first-time employment data in our educator database system, districts are reporting from 2015-16 to 2019-20 academic year, approximately 1,292 new educators of color have been hired across Connecticut. During the 2019-20 academic year, all first-time hired educators, meaning those appearing in EDS for the first time, showed that 16.5% of the new hires were educators of color. Next slide. Strategy 3, supporting candidates. The Bureau of Educator Standards and Certification issued a total of 23,276 educator certificates and answered over 10,000 calls and responded to thousands of emails. We provide support to our candidates in a variety of ways. Teach Connecticut. This is the state's online platform for recruiting teachers and elevating the profession. The goal is to support 175 future teachers in applying to an educator prep program between September of 2019 and August of 2020. Teach Connecticut has already hosted about 3 times the number of one-on-one advising calls this year compared to last. And more than 50% of the advising call participants are people of color. During this period of COVID from March to present, Teach has seen record-breaking interest and engagement from potential future teachers on key metrics. The RESC MTR Alliance contract, the CSTE and RESC Alliance hosted 2 virtual career fairs, June 2nd and 3rd of 2020, aimed at increasing racial, ethnic, and linguistic diversity of our educator workforce. Invitations were sent to teachers of color not appearing in our employment database. They were also sent to recent graduates of Connecticut educator prep programs, HBCUs, and HSIs. The fair attracted 33 districts to create virtual booths, and the 2-day event brought more than 500 conversations via chat, audio, or video calls. Preliminary feedback was positive, with suggestions to inform future events. The Connecticut Troops to Teachers, we're in year 3 of a 5-year grant period. The goals are listed on the slide. Program coordinators are in place for the 4 Connecticut State Universities identified in the grant proposal. The Troops to Teachers program expanded this year with an additional program coordinator selected at one of our state universities. Next slide.
As Dr. Tucker previously alluded to, the CSD Talent Office and district partners from Windsor, Hartford, and Bristol collaborated with a group of diverse educators from each of the New England states in a series of in-person and virtual convenings over the past year to discuss the need, the value, and the focus of increasing the workforce diversity across the New England states. As a result of the work, the group produced a regional guidance document increasing the racial, ethnic, and linguistic diversity of the educator workforce, a call to action for leaders. You will note that the title of the document is very similar to the Connecticut State Department of Ed and Talent Office's hiring and selection guide. The work not only provided meaningful opportunities to engage as a region in dialogue and the sharing of best practices, but it also served as an acknowledgement that Connecticut has been a leader in this work across the region. The work group was so impressed with the Connecticut Talent Office framework as an approach to the work that the group chose to adapt and build from previous work of the Talent Office. The Connecticut team had a significant impact on the regional work, and our very own Dr. Samuel Galloway from Bristol Public Schools was asked by the consortium to prepare the video welcoming and opening for the report's web page, launching page. And so, again, I think, as we've discussed, we recognize that there's still so much work to do. But what was reassuring this past year in many instances was that within the New England region, the framework and the efforts that have been put in from the Connecticut State Department of Education were recognized as an effective approach to really looking at the educator continuum as a whole and developing strategies to look at each aspect of the educator pipeline. Next slide.
While we've made some accomplishments the past 5 years, we will not rest on our laurels. There is still much work to be done. And as a result, we will continue to work to diversify our educator pipeline by continuing to collaborate with our partners and entities aligned with our mission and to be forward thinking. So while we will focus on retention and retention strategies, we will also focus on several other initiatives. Next slide. On yesterday, we were pleased to launch our statewide Ed Rising initiative at New Britain High School with Governor Lamont and Commissioner Cardona. This program was developed by teachers for teachers with the generous support of the National Education Association, the AFT, and the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. PDK International's Educators Rising program emphasizes fundamental professional practices that are critical for the next generation of aspiring teachers to develop and take their first steps on the path to realizing their full potential. The program, which includes curriculum, teacher training, and beginning to teach micro-credentials for students and pre-college courses, is a centerpiece of a Grow Your Own teacher recruitment strategy. In-service teachers who aim to mentor and aspire high school students to teach in their own communities are critical to the program's success. Ed Rising has been awarded a grant from the Buck Foundation to implement the program in the 8 school districts listed on the slide for the 2020-21 school year in Connecticut. The grant has also allowed us to hire a part-time teacher leader in residence to assist with site management. Our teacher leader in residence is Sandy Fraioli and hails from New Britain. Please note that New Britain was the first site in Connecticut signing on 3 years ago, and Waterbury is a new site that signed on this year. However, we will include them with the other 8 districts so that we can ensure alignment and resources for all to take full advantage of. Next slide. Teaching Fellowship Program. In an effort to make a commitment to student success and student-focused teaching and learning, the School of Education and Professional Studies at Central Connecticut State University is partnering with the State Department of Education to create the Teacher Fellowship Program. The goal of the program is to enhance teaching innovation and teaching quality by bringing together a cohort of outstanding teaching fellows to foster excellence and rigor in the next generation of teachers while supporting K-12 student learning in Connecticut. This program is currently open to undergraduate teacher candidates within the School of Education and Professional Studies. However, priority will be given to teacher candidates from underrepresented groups and students enrolled in shortage areas. The Teacher Fellowship Program is designed to create enhanced learning environments for both the CCSU teacher candidates as well as K-12 students. Providing opportunities for our teacher candidates to work within school districts will enhance their own professional growth as well as positively impact student learning and achievement of all students. CCSU will provide students with several resources. The state will provide funding to cover the cost of student background checks and fingerprinting and provide professional mentors. We will collaborate with organizations such as Black Leaders and Administrators Consortium, and CALUS to assist with providing professional mentors to our students. We are still in the planning phases of this program, but we seek to implement a pilot prior to the end of this year. Our goal is for this program to be replicated by other universities in Connecticut to work with districts and provide experiential learning to students earlier in their career. I will state that we are targeting students who are sophomores and juniors enrolled in EPP programs. Next slide. We wish to thank the members of the Minority Policy Oversight Council who have worked with us and provided guidance and feedback on the initiatives we've shared with you today. They have played an integral role in the work that we have accomplished to date. Next slide. 3 of our members who are attending this meeting have shared the following reflections with us regarding the work of the Minority Policy Oversight Council. They are Dr. Terrell Hill, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Windsor Public Schools, Mr. Salvador Escobalas, Teacher and Union President, New Britain Federation of Teachers and Talent Development Recruitment Placement Specialist, Dr. Rebecca Good, Dean of Relay Graduate School of Education, and earlier on the call, we also had Dr. Kim Costellas, Dean of Education and Professional Studies at CCSU. Next slide. And now, we will entertain any other questions that you may have. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share this information with you all.
Thank you very, very much for doing this very thorough examination of where we are and what has changed so far. And I think above all, it shows the commitment of the department to really ensure that we increase the numbers. It also shows that there are multiple pieces and parts that are connected. And if one of those parts is not intentional or committed to, then the implicit pathway is going to be very difficult. So we need to work together to make this really a commitment of the whole, not of just one area. It's critical and essential. We will continue. I think as a board, we're committed to this, We have said it before, we have said it here, and we are delighted to see that this is a priority for the department, and we continue to work again at all levels. I sent my colleague Don Harris the data about the Rika water, so you can enjoy that and see it. But again, I'm how can I say it? I'm concerned because we need to know not only that the department is committed, but that all the other levels, all the other entities have the same degree of commitment and are willing to work together to ensure that the students are there, they graduate and they go to teaching. And also after they teach, they begin to teach, you support them, that they have the support to be successful. I know, Alan, you have Charlene and Daisy on my phone.
So I want to take a second to step out of the Debbie role for a second, because as I'm looking at all the work that's being done around this, having been on the other side of it, I look up there and Woody Exley has been doing this work quietly and slowly for over 20 years before it had a title. And I think, as Estella, as you talk about the different components and the different parts, there's a part there that has been going on for over 20 years, and I just want to call it out. I was a recipient, the Commissioner was a recipient, but that's someone who has been plugging away at this, not asking for credit, not asking for anything, for over 20 plus years to help the state move those numbers. So, Mr. Harris, to your point earlier about the higher ed, we have folks like Woody and programs like that matter, because those are the types of things that are going to help us move the needle here. I would be remiss if I did not say
Thank you
And I
for your
wanna
kind words, Desi.
And I also want to add, as a resident of New Britain and working at CCSU, this really made my day. It really did, because on behalf of the students of New Britain and Connecticut, that we deliver these educational resources, but this is going to really be, this is going to be such an important pilot and initiative that needed to happen years ago. So thank you so much for all the hard work that all of you have put in. And thank you, Commissioner Cardona. Now I understand why you were visiting New Britain yesterday.
Claro. So really quickly, thank you, Desi, for giving kudos to the Godfather. You know, Woody actually, as was mentioned, he's quiet, doesn't want a lot of attention around this, but I could go through the name of recipients who are now contributing throughout the country. We have recipients that are teachers in California in different parts. They're professors now. So thank you. I'm glad you did that. And yes, and I want to just give a quick shout out to President Toro, who went to New Britain High School yesterday, sat in the audience to observe the Ed Rising situation, because she too feels like she wants Central to be one of the players in this. So I appreciate the comment, and I do want to acknowledge when I see colleges stepping up and saying, we have a role here. What can we do better? What can we do differently? And Shawana partnering with them, I'm really excited about the potential moving forward. Deputy Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner. I really just wanted to thank the board for what you've done, in the board plan to call this out as a priority and as a goal, and the work that the staff has done, being data informed, with all the conversations that you've had as to where the issues are, using that data to inform the efforts going forward. And while we know there's a lot to do, I want to take a second to appreciate, the goal of 1,000 educators with that, and that we're marching in that direction, not to stop there, but appreciating the fact that we all have to continue to work together in the different spaces to prepare, to attract, and to retain teachers of color in this space. So I want to appreciate the board for doing that, and for the staff who continues to do the work every day.
I could just mention that at the program in New Britain, one of our scholarship recipients, Dr. Violet Jimenez Sims, was actually the first teacher who started the precursor of that program 9 years ago. and now she's gone on to get her doctorate, and she's on the Board of Education in New Britain, and now she's at the NEAG School.
Well done.
On that program, since it's been going on now for so many years, some of the students are now out of college, and I think it's important to try to track them to see how many are actually teaching now. I know I've talked to Dr. Tucker and Sandy Fraiola about that, and that would really demonstrate the efficacy of the program if we can show that the participants in the program are now teaching.
We are, and I will share this because this was an earlier question that was asked, and with the Grow Your Own model, I wholeheartedly agree of pushing down to middle grades. We're starting off in high school, but in Britain, there is an after-school club at the K-8 school, and it targets 7th and 8th graders. And so the whole intent when that was officially formalized about 2.5 years ago was to start to interest our students in 7th and 8th grade before they transition to high school in the field of education and teaching, because there is a lot of misinformation with students regarding the field, what the benefits are, how much you make, what is actually required when you get to higher education. And so it's been a great feeder for 7th and 8th grade students to feed directly into the Ed Rising program at the high school, so that Sandy and Colleen, the advisors, can catch these students coming when they walk right in the door as freshmen to kind of keep up the interest that they have within the program. And then our goal with CCSU has been, once they graduate, many of the students do go to CCSU, they go to other institutions as well, but to be able to follow them. And we've had many conversations to say, how can we take our students in high school and expose them to a college experience such as with Upward Bound and other summer programs before they become freshmen, because we realize that many of our students have not been exposed to what life is on a college campus and what that expectation is. So the earlier that we can expose our students to those types of experiences, the more successful that they would be. And that was one of the reasons why, in looking at the teacher fellowship program, I've had many conversations with Central about this. And we said, freshman year, let people get settled into their routine of what it is to be a college student and their courses. Let's tap them sophomore year. And the dean agreed. That's an excellent time for them to start gaining experience within classroom, because when we looked at data about 2 years ago, we noticed that people entered the program, but after sophomore, junior year, they were changing majors. And we're like, why did they change their major? And many of the students said, well, because I didn't have any education courses, and so I got interested in something else. So we're trying to make sure that everything remains relevant for them sooner rather than later. And I will say that Callis and Black were thrilled to step up when I asked them, would you like to provide professional mentors to students in this program? They were like, absolutely, we are 100% on board.
Can I ask Dr. Tucker to just explain Black and Callis what they are? And I think, I want us to kind of keep in mind, relationships matter. You know, we heard Vernon, they use culture and relationships to get students to be successful. Mentorship and relationships as these pre-service teachers go through the process, many times being first-generation college students. So the role of Black and Callis is critically important. Could you say who they are, Joanna? And what role they're going to have? What does it stand for, maybe?
Sure. I think I said it, but in the presentation, but I don't remember. It's the Black Leaders and Administrators Consortium, which is Black, and then Callis is the Latino Administrators Organization. And so what we're going to do is Central is going to provide an internal mentor for students who are there enrolled in the program, but we're going to support that with a professional mentor. And we're working right now on defining what expectations are of professional mentors from both of these organizations.
Thank you. You know, we're systematically calling out our Black and brown educators and leaders to say, we need your help for that mentorship. Be somebody else's mentor, because we know that it's not just challenging for these pre-service teachers to get into the program, finish the program, get the job, but also stay in the job. We don't want to lose them when they become teachers. So having that networking and that mentoring is baked into the strategy. So thank you, Sean.
Anything else on this? Thank you all.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Good job.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that takes us to committee reports. Academic standards.
Yes. So we did meet, the committee met, and I don't remember the agenda, but I know it was very, I know we did. We reviewed the Latino and African American curriculum that will be presented later on. That's all.
Thank you. Accountability and support.
We met September 17th and we talked to New Haven about their plan of never coming back. Although they said that they will try to have a face-to-face at some point in the universe. And we are meeting again on October 20th and one of the charter schools that was asked to come back to the accountability committee.
Commissioner, on that note, the last time we met with New Haven, happily, they were bringing back their special ed population, their most. Do we have any idea of how that's gone for them? And have they, I know they said it was going to be 60 first, and then do we know, have they expanded yet?
I don't have that information.
Okay.
Do you? I know you.
Yeah, so they're around 125 as of now. They started slowly to build up that number. They have a meeting, I believe, on the 13th. Their board is going to meet, and their plan is to bring kids in November.
Right.
So we will have more information. And we've been since that meeting. There's been a lot of ongoing conversations. So I want
it's an ongoing
communication.
Well, I'm here that I know they were starting and they were going to wait, and I'm so glad to hear that the expansion is going on. That's what I was really concerned about.
Finance, audit, and budget has not met legislation and policy.
We did meet this morning. We had some updates on ed prep programs from Chris. Basically, the difficulties that these programs are having since the pandemic and getting portfolios, and for our folks out there that are trying to become certified. So he gave us a very good update on that, and some of the waivers and different avenues that they have put in place for those. You saw the sign language come forward. So the full board, we are continuing our discussion on the racial equity statement. In fact, Adrian presented to us, and Karen and Malia are going to work with Adrian to refine that statement and bring back to the committee that eventually the whole board will see. We ran out of time, as we always do. Justin did bring us a slight update, a little update in the 5-year plan, but it's going to wait until we have more time to go through it. So it will be further up on it. We knew that going in when we had something that the committee had to deal with, that we moved it down. It will now go up. And just to the chair and the commissioner, as soon as this meeting time and place is set for November, the committee overall would like to meet like we usually do prior, but I would need to know the start time of whether or not that's possible. So as soon as that is set, we'll determine whether or not policy and legislation meet prior, as we usually do. That was everything for us this morning. Got through a lot in a short time.
That way.
Alan, finance audit met in September.
Pardon?
Reminded that finance audit met in September.
Thank you for the reminder.
Okay.
But I don't have, frankly, I can't report anything on it because I don't remember what we talked about.
Okay.
I don't know if any of our other members would like to say anything about the September meeting of finance.
You basically went over the plan for the audit, what happened last year, and then the plan for the internal audit coming year, which was on the earlier consent agenda.
Okay. Where are we? Check CTEX. No, we can.
Yeah.
CTEX.
Yes, Jeff should be on the somebody can electronically make him appear. He can give the report.
We need the wizard.
Jeff?
Right.
And, I don't know that there's any updates there. I did learn that he lost power during this meeting.
Oh, my God.
So, the wizard, in keeping with the thing, there was a storm in Kansas, so. There it is.
We're all have to wear red shoes back in.
Yeah. No, I'm hot spot.
It's like, oh.
Do we have an update for CTEC?
Yeah, I guess if Jeff is available, if somebody could activate his mic.
We're all looking at each other.
Who has that power?
It used to be he.
Yeah, we can send something
unmute
out.
yourself now and join the meeting. There you go. Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Very clear.
Jeff and his team is very busy, so.
Great. So, two items we're going to report on to you this month. One is we have a most up-to-date enrollment report. Our October 1 enrollment report saw incoming ninth graders at 3,079, which is pretty much within par with what we've had the last 2 years. It's give or take 50, a little more than 2 years ago by 50 and a little bit less than last year. One of the biggest changes statistically that we noticed this year is we're taking in 16.7% special education students. So our prevalence rate went from 14.8% last year to 16.7% this year. And it was 12.2% 3 years ago. So over the course of 4 years, CTEX has gone from a 9% to a 12% to a 14.8% to a 16.7% prevalence rate. So we've got several additional hundred special education students in our incoming class. So, for stakeholders that are out in the communities that say, the technical high schools are not taking special education students, you can proudly report back that we're taking pretty much on the money above the statewide prevalence rate. So that's kind of a point of pride for us over at CTEX, the inclusive nature of our incoming freshman class. Really quickly, the first month we've been in hybrid mode in most of our locations, and we have spent most of the time with the kids in with our ninth graders being in their trade areas so that they can complete their exploratory phase and select their shops. Basically, in about a week, we will have all of our ninth graders signed, sealed, and delivered into shops of their choices, which is very important. If there was ever an uptick, and that's a little bit ahead of schedule. So we really prioritize getting ninth graders to select their shops. Just briefly, we want to report that we're, for the first time for this upcoming enrollment process, we're going to be attempting to do a full online recruitment effort. In other words, potential students can actually apply for the CTEX schools online. And they still can do it via paper if they choose to, but we felt it was it would be a good measure to reach out to more students and make it easier for them to get a hold of our application process. And two, obviously, because of the pandemic, it makes it, paperless and touchless. Our CTEX board is going to be reviewing and voting on an updated admissions policy at the October meeting. And they will also be reviewing a policy and procedures for it as well. I wanted to note that all of our 17 high schools, except for Danbury, opened in a hybrid. And I'm happy to report next Tuesday, Danbury will be moving out of full distance learning at Abbott Tech into a hybrid model. The other difference from the rest of the schools was this week we had Norwich Tech follow suit with Norwich Public Schools and NFA, and we went into full distance learning this week only. And we will be reviewing that tomorrow and Friday to make a decision about where we'll be moving, the following week after that. So that's just a quick report about our distance learning hybrid roles and our incoming freshman class that we're excited to have start with us this past month.
Questions? I've got a couple. One, with a significant increase like that in your special ed population, have you expanded your special ed teaching resources, or was there enough capacity without any expansion? And then the second is, how do you do tech ed remotely? Is it just the academic subjects, or what are you doing?
So, Chairman, the question is, we did not have all of the resources in place, and we did do some hiring to meet the better meet the incoming population. Because you're correct, it is requiring a different staffing plan to meet the needs of the incoming kids. So that's something that we're working on ongoing, even at this point. And the second question is, it is a barrier to do technical education online. It is possible. When we do the technical education piece, 50% of it is hands-on, the tech ed, and 50% of it is what they call theory, where they're actually reading and writing and speaking about the tech ed. So that 50% that's theory-based, we can do it via distance learning, but the hands-on part is very difficult. Not that the kids couldn't do things on their own. A lot of the times the barrier is they don't have access to some of the technical tools, the machines, that's the part that's hard. So with our re-entry plan this year, we actually highlighted more time when the kids are in school, more than a 2-to-1 ratio, they're in their trade areas. So, and we did seek student and family voice on this over the summer, and we had overwhelming response from our kids and our families that when the kids were in school, they wanted to be in the trade area. It was greater than 70% of the survey results highlighted that they did want to be in the trade. So we listened to our constituency and we built our re-entry plan to reflect that. So when the kids are in the building, it's like 66% of the time they're in shop, and then 1/3 of the time they go up in there with their academic teachers, which is also important too, because it's good for them to get that face-to-face time with the academic teachers as well. That's two great questions.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff.
NASB, you got anything?
They asked me, I'm not the liaison for NASB, but we do need a liaison for NASB. But because I participate in the whole child study group, they did ask me to remind new members that the new member orientation is October 20th. So I don't know if new members have received that information, but we probably should find a way of getting that information to them. But it is, they have a virtual annual conference as well later this month, but the new member is October 20th.
Can you check into that?
Okay. And it's virtual.
Sir.
Just reporting the professional development that CERC is offering, which is numerous. And there's just so many of them. Para-training, a lot of with the EL framework, which they had reported to us a couple of months back, which is great to see. Autism, restorative practices, and not just for teachers, but for teachers, paras, even for parents. So overwhelming amount of professional development coming out of CERC, as it has been for quite some time. But a great resource for our educators, certainly.
Can I ask a quick question about CERT, not related to professional development? Is the curriculum gotten here?
It was presented to the, Aries Committee, the, academic,
Academic standards.
right, but it wasn't presented, specifically, it was presented in terms of objectives, broadly. They plan to present it to Aries Committee, I think, in the next time we meet. And then from there, the curriculum will come.
Okay.
So they're.
That's the African American history and Hispanic.
Right.
Now, in our last CERC meeting, we also got an update on it, and I believe at that time, their timeline for us was just, they were hoping for our December meeting that they would be presenting to the state board.
Right.
That was their timeline. I don't know if that's changed.
No, I think that's the timeline they will present, I think, in November.
Yeah.
Again, the specificity of the both curriculum, and then,
No, that's.
It's excellent so far, what I've seen is excellent.
I did sit on that committee, so I was just wondering.
Yeah.
But the curriculums I've seen, I just think it's
Honestly,
excellent.
Aaron, I hope it's just the beginning.
I do too, but I was very impressed with what little we saw.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is there anything else anybody wants to bring up?
That's in.
Okay, thank you. I think we are finished and adjourned.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Charlene, I have a question.
Better than the first